It started with laughter drifting across the water, voices echoing where silence used to live. By sunset, my private lake had become someone else's party. I warned them once. I filmed everything. When the cops arrived, she thought I'd lose. She didn't realize the camera never lies. If you believe truth deserves witnesses and power should answer to proof, subscribe, because stories like this show what happens when control meets accountability. The lake had always been quiet in the evenings, a sheet of dark glass reflecting pine trees and long shadows. I bought the property for that silence, for the way sound softened at the water's edge and the world seemed to pause. The listing mentioned shoreline rights, easements, surveys, and boundaries, all the boring words people skim. I didn't skim. I studied every inch, every clause, because land means responsibility, and responsibility means clarity. The lake wasn't large, but it was mine, fully enclosed within my parcel, recorded and staked long before the subdivision existed. The Homeowners Association arrived years later, built its fences and rules, and learned to speak loudly. I stayed quiet. That evening, the quiet broke. Music carried across the water, bass thudding like a second heartbeat. Lights flickered where no lights belonged. Cars lined a dirt access road that dead-ended at my gate, tires pressed into the gravel like trespass marks. I stood on my porch and counted silhouettes moving along the shoreline, shadows slipping where only fish used to stir. It felt personal, not because of the noise, but because of the assumption. Someone decided this place was available. Someone decided my name didn't matter. I walked down to the waterline with my phone already recording, the camera lens catching the last orange smear of sunset. The air smelled like barbecue smoke and spilled beer. Laughter spiked, careless and confident. I didn't raise my voice. I stated the boundary, named the property, referenced the signs that had been there for years. I pointed to the survey markers half buried near the bank. Faces turned, surprised that a person could appear where a resource had been claimed. The music dipped, then resumed louder, defiant. She arrived after that, the HOA board member whose presence traveled faster than her footsteps. Her posture carried authority, chin lifted, shoulders squared, a practiced stance. She didn't ask questions. She announced conclusions. The lake, she said, was common space. The guests, she said, had permission. The rules, she said, were clear. I let the camera run and asked her to point to the document. She waved a hand at the water like it answered to her gesture. Around us, phones appeared, but mine stayed steady. I explained again, calmly, that the association had no rights here. I cited the county records, the plat map, the recorded deed. I described the access point that didn't exist for them and the gate they'd bypassed. She smiled thinly, the way people smile when they're certain the system backs them. She told her guests to stay put. She told me to leave them alone. She told me the cops were on their way. The threat hung there, heavy and familiar. Power often borrows uniforms to feel legitimate. I didn't stop recording. I widened the frame to include the cars, the plates, the faces, the markers. I narrated what was happening without speaking to anyone, describing the time, the date, the location, the lack of consent. The lake reflected blue now, the first stars coming out, the water absorbing the noise like it always had, patient and enduring. When the police lights finally appeared at the road, the party paused. Conversations lowered. The music cut. Red and blue streaked across the surface of the lake, breaking it into fractured colors. Officers stepped out, hands resting near radios, eyes scanning. She moved first, intercepting them with confidence, pointing at me, gesturing at the water, telling a story that sounded rehearsed. I stayed where I was, feet planted on my shoreline, camera still running. The officers listened. Then they listened to me. I handed over printed copies I kept in a weatherproof folder by the door, documents people laugh at until they need them. The survey. The deed. The tax records. The no trespassing affidavit filed after the first incident years back. My phone captured the slow shift as the officers read, the way certainty drains when facts arrive. Questions changed direction. The guests started to pack up, uneasy now, eyes avoiding mine. She argued louder as control slipped. She insisted on HOA authority, on community norms, on years of use. I zoomed in on the survey stakes, on the signage, on the officers conferring quietly. One officer walked the boundary with me, flashlight tracing the markers like constellations. The lake went silent except for insects and the soft lapping of water. That should have been the end. It wasn't. As the guests were told to leave, she stepped back, phone in hand, already crafting the next move. Her eyes met the camera, and for a moment, something flickered there, calculation. She said one last thing before turning away, a promise disguised as a warning, and I knew the real fight was just beginning. Morning came with the dull ache that follows confrontation, the kind that settles into the bones before the sun is fully up. The lake looked unchanged, smooth and innocent, as if nothing had happened. Tire marks still scarred the dirt road, flattened grass showed where chairs had been dragged, and a crushed can glittered near the waterline like evidence that refused to disappear. I filmed again, slow and methodical, documenting the aftermath the way investigators do, because nights like that don't end when the lights fade. They echo. By mid-morning, the HOA emails started. Subject lines screamed urgency. Authority wrapped itself in bold fonts and exclamation points. The board announced an emergency meeting, cited community access concerns, and warned residents against misinformation. My name wasn't mentioned, but the implication was sharp enough to cut. I read every word without replying, letting them stack like bricks in a wall they were building too fast to see the cracks. I spent the afternoon at the county office, a building that smells like paper and patience. Clerks moved with practiced calm, sliding folders across counters, stamping dates, answering the same questions for decades. I requested certified copies, maps enlarged to poster size, notarized statements that explained boundaries in language no committee could twist. The clerk glanced at my folder and nodded knowingly. These disputes weren't rare. Entitlement had a predictable arc. Back home, I mounted a weatherproof camera facing the access road and another covering the shoreline, both angled to capture faces, plates, and the markers that told the truth. Transparency doesn't hide. It illuminates. As I worked, cars slowed on the road. Heads turned. The message traveled faster than any email. The lake had eyes now. That evening, flyers appeared on mailboxes. Photocopied claims about shared amenities, historical use, community spirit. Words like everyone and always did a lot of heavy lifting without evidence to support them. I filmed the flyers where they lay, then removed the ones on my property, placing them neatly in an evidence bag. Documentation isn't dramatic. It's relentless. The emergency meeting was held at the clubhouse, lights blazing like a stage. I didn't attend. Instead, I watched from the live stream they forgot to make private, screen recording active. Audio crisp. The board spoke about unity while displaying maps that conveniently cropped my parcel out. She led the presentation, pointer tapping where my lake should have been labeled common. Applause followed statements unsupported by facts. I saved the file with the date and time. The next day, a certified letter arrived, heavy with the confidence of letterhead. It demanded compliance, threatened fines, referenced bylaws that didn't apply. I filmed opening it, filmed reading it, filmed the return receipt when I sent my response. My letter was brief. It attached documents. It requested cessation of trespass and harassment. It warned of escalation. Power respects boundaries when boundaries are enforced. Neighbors began stopping by, curious at first, then cautious. Some apologized, others tested the waters with hypotheticals. I didn't editorialize. I showed them the maps. I let the camera run. Truth travels slower than rumors, but it lasts longer. A few thanked me quietly. A few warned me to back down for the sake of peace. Peace built on theft isn't peace. Then came the inspectors. Clipboards, vests, vehicles bearing logos that suggest neutrality. They checked setbacks, measured fences, photographed my gate. I answered questions, provided permits, pointed to approvals stamped years ago. One inspector lingered at the lake, staring at the boundary line like it offended him. I filmed his hesitation. Bureaucracy dislikes clarity when clarity disrupts habit. That night, noise returned. Smaller this time, a test. A handful of figures near the water, voices low, laughter forced. I didn't confront them. I recorded. The cameras caught plates as they arrived, timestamps as they crossed the markers, the moment an HOA truck pulled up and idled. I sent the footage to the association's council and the county simultaneously. Lines matter more when you draw them with ink. The police came again, quicker this time. The officers recognized the location, the calm voice on the phone, the folder waiting on the table. Trespass warnings were issued. Names were written down. One officer nodded toward the cameras and said nothing. The quiet returned, brittle but real. By the end of the week, the board's tone shifted. Emails softened into requests for meetings. Mediation was suggested. I declined until trespass stopped completely. Control only negotiates when it loses leverage. The lake stayed still, reflecting clouds that moved on regardless of paperwork and pride. Late Friday afternoon, a notice appeared on the HOA site, an announcement of a special vote to reclassify amenities. The map included my lake again, neatly shaded. The date was circled in red. I watched the posting numbers climb as residents reacted. My camera watched too, unwavering. I knew then this wasn't just about water. It was about who decides what belongs to whom, and how far people will go when cameras remove their masks. The vote loomed, and with it, a choice that would expose everything they'd been hiding. The week before the vote unfolded like a slow tightening, the kind that makes every sound sharper and every silence heavier. The lake reflected the sky faithfully, clouds drifting across it like thoughts that refused to settle. I kept recording, not out of paranoia but precision. Patterns reveal themselves when you let time talk. Cars circled more often. Walkers paused longer at the fence. Phones lifted and lowered as if pretending not to stare. The boundary markers remained where they had always been, small and stubborn, indifferent to attention. Letters arrived daily now, some official, some handwritten. A few were kind, neighbors acknowledging confusion, admitting they'd never looked at the plat map. Others accused me of selfishness, of hoarding a natural feature, of standing in the way of community joy. I filmed each envelope before opening it, each page as it landed on the table. Accusations feel less powerful when they're catalogued. I never replied in anger. Facts don't need volume. The HOA board escalated with confidence borrowed from momentum. They announced listening sessions that listened selectively. They hired a consultant who spoke fluently about usage and precedent, words designed to sound legal without being binding. I watched another live stream, recording as slides blurred the line between opinion and authority. My lake appeared again, labeled ambiguously, colors bleeding beyond boundaries. When someone asked about deeds, the answer dissolved into process. Process is how responsibility hides. I met with a land use attorney whose office smelled like old books and certainty. We spread the documents across a long table, paper overlapping paper like a mosaic of truth. He nodded slowly, tracing the boundary with a finger, noting dates and filings. He asked about access, signage, enforcement. I showed him clips from the camera, time-stamped and clear. He smiled without humor and said escalation was already happening, whether I liked it or not. That night, a car stopped at the gate and idled with the lights off. The camera caught the plate, the silhouette inside shifting. The engine cut. The quiet pressed down. I didn't go outside. I let the cameras do their work. After 10 minutes, the car left. 10 minutes can feel longer than a meeting when intent sits in the dark. Flyers changed tone. Where they had claimed common access before, they now appealed to sentiment. Words like tradition and shared memories floated across pages taped to poles. Someone printed a photo of children at the water years ago, taken from a public angle that hid the fence. Memory can be edited like any image. I filmed the flyers in situ, then removed them from my property again. The fence stayed intact, humming faintly in the heat. The special vote approached, and with it a campaign. Board members went door to door. The consultant posted op-eds on community forums. Screenshots circulated with captions crafted to inflame. My name finally appeared, stripped of context, attached to adjectives that pretended to explain motives. I responded once, publicly, with a link to the county records. No commentary. Just proof. The post was shared less, but bookmarked more. 2 days before the vote, a temporary access sign appeared at the old dirt road, hammered into the ground overnight. The letters were neat, the arrows deliberate. I filmed it at dawn, dew clinging to the post, the lake behind it still asleep. I removed the sign, documenting the screws and the holes. By noon, another appeared. By sunset, a third. Persistence can be misread as authority. Cameras correct that mistake. The police returned after dusk, lights low, voices calm. The same officers again. They reviewed the footage, the letters, the sign cycle. One officer shook his head slowly, a gesture that spoke louder than words. A report was filed for harassment and false signage. Names were added. Paper trails grow the way roots do, quietly, until concrete cracks. The night before the vote, rain came hard and sudden, drumming the lake into motion. The cameras caught reflections breaking, lights smearing across ripples. Somewhere across the road, a gathering broke early, chairs scraping, voices raised. I slept lightly, waking to check feeds, to note timestamps. Control hates uncertainty. Evidence thrives in it. Vote day arrived gray and close. The clubhouse filled early, cars lining streets like spectators at a game. I stayed home, watching feeds, recording screens, the cameras trained on the lake and the road. The board called the meeting to order with solemnity that bordered on theater. They spoke of unity again, of solutions that respected everyone. Then they presented the motion. Maps appeared. Arguments followed. The consultant spoke. Applause rose and fell. When questions about deeds surfaced, they were tabled. When the county filings were mentioned, they were minimized. The vote commenced. Hands lifted. Counts tallied. The motion passed by a narrow margin, cheers breaking out like release. Within minutes, a notification hit my phone, an email declaring the lake reclassified, access restored, enforcement forthcoming. My camera caught a truck turning down the dirt road, tires spraying water from puddles, a group following on foot. The lake reflected their approach, distorted but unmistakable. I stood at the window and watched the feed, breath steady, documents already staged. The law doesn't change because a room votes. But people test it anyway. As the first foot crossed the marker, my phone vibrated with an incoming call from the attorney. His message was brief and certain. The next move, he said, would expose everything. The moment access was restored, momentum surged like water released from a dam. The truck rolled closer, headlights cutting through the gray, followed by neighbors emboldened by the vote's applause. The lake mirrored them all, faces stretched and broken by ripples, reality distorted but recorded. I didn't step outside. I adjusted angles, checked batteries, and let the long lens do what it was built to do, capture truth without emotion. By the time the first group reached the shoreline, the attorney's second message came through, calmer than the storm building outside. He advised patience. He advised documentation. He advised letting authority expose itself when it crossed a line. Authority, when wrong, is loud. The cameras were quiet. Shoes crossed markers. Coolers scraped dirt. A flag bearing the HOA logo was planted inches from a survey stake, cloth snapping wetly in the wind. Laughter rose, tentative at first, then confident, carried by the assumption that votes outrank deeds. I filmed the flag from multiple angles, ensuring the marker shared the frame. Context matters. Another email arrived, this one from the board, announcing enforcement had begun. Fines were listed. Deadlines imposed. Language hardened again, certainty returning with an edge. I forwarded it to council and the county recorder. The lake absorbed the noise, waves lapping like punctuation between moments. The police arrived within the hour, quicker still, 2 cruisers pulling up with lights off until they weren't. The shift in mood was immediate. Voices lowered. Some stepped back instinctively. Officers surveyed the scene with practiced neutrality, eyes flicking from people to posts to water lines. I watched from the feed as one officer recognized the markers, recognized the folder I'd handed him days earlier. She approached them with the same posture as before, confidence sharpened by victory. She gestured at the group, the flag, the water, the vote. The argument flowed easily, practiced now, built from repetition rather than truth. The officers listened. Then one turned and asked for documentation. I stepped outside then, camera still running, folder in hand. The rain had slowed, mist hanging low. I stayed behind the fence, the boundary clear even to those who pretended not to see it. I passed copies through the gap, careful, methodical. The officers read. The lens captured their expressions changing again, the familiar pivot when paper meets rhetoric. The senior officer walked the boundary once more, boots sinking slightly into wet ground, flashlight tracing the stakes. He paused at the flag, lifted it gently, and removed it from the soil. The cloth sagged, suddenly weightless without belief holding it up. The crowd murmured. Someone protested. Someone laughed nervously. The officer's voice carried enough to be heard without being raised. He explained, simply, that votes don't alter recorded deeds. He explained that access requires right-of-way, not consensus. He explained that trespass doesn't become legal by repetition. The words landed heavy, undeniable. Warnings were issued again, firmer this time. Names were noted twice. One officer asked me if I wished to press charges. I said not yet. Patience isn't weakness, it's leverage. The group dispersed slowly, deflation visible in posture and pace. Cars pulled away, leaving ruts that would dry crooked by morning. She lingered, eyes on the lake like it had betrayed her. The camera caught the moment her certainty cracked, just for a second, when she realized control had overreached. She turned, phone out, fingers already moving, building the next narrative. I didn't interrupt. Exposure happens in layers. By dawn, the aftermath spread online. Clips surfaced, trimmed and captioned, context bent. I released my footage in full, uncut, timestamps intact. I posted maps, filings, the officer's explanations, the flag's removal from the stake. The difference between spectacle and evidence is length. People watched longer than expected. The county responded next, issuing a notice that clarified boundaries publicly and warned against unauthorized signage and gatherings. It was written in careful language that left little room for interpretation. Screenshots circulated again, this time with quieter commentary. Silence can be instructive. The HOA's counsel reached out, proposing a pause, suggesting negotiation. My attorney replied with conditions. Cease all claims, retract communications, acknowledge boundaries, cover costs incurred. The response took longer this time. Power recalibrates slowly. Days passed without cars at the gate. The lake returned to itself, reflections smoothing, birds reclaiming edges. The fence hummed softly, cameras blinking steady red dots. I kept recording anyway. Trust, once broken, requires receipts. Then a new letter arrived, heavier than the rest. It announced a compliance review of my property, scheduled without consent. Inspectors again, but different ones this time, from farther away. The timing was precise, the language formal. Retaliation wears many uniforms. I set the folder back on the table, added the new letter to the stack, and checked the feeds. The long lens showed the dirt road empty, the markers unchanged, the water calm. Calm can be misleading. As I charged batteries and cleared memory cards, I knew the next test wouldn't come from the shoreline. It would come from somewhere more official, where power prefers to fight. The compliance review arrived with the sound of engines on gravel, slow and deliberate, the kind meant to announce presence before purpose. 2 vehicles stopped short of the gate, logos unfamiliar, uniforms crisp. Clipboards came out first, then cameras of their own, lenses sweeping like they expected confession from the landscape. I kept my distance, fence between us, my camera running, time stamped, steady. Authority often assumes proximity equals permission. Boundaries correct that assumption. They introduced themselves with neutral words, cited statutes with confidence, and explained the scope of their review as if it were routine. Setbacks, structures, access points, environmental impact. The language suggested concern without specificity, a fishing net cast wide enough to catch something eventually. I nodded, listened, and provided permits already approved years ago, each stamped and dated. The papers changed hands carefully, their weight more persuasive than tone. One inspector lingered at the shoreline, staring across the water as if expecting it to confess. He mentioned community usage patterns and long-standing assumptions, phrases that feel like facts when repeated often enough. I filmed the markers behind him, the fence line clear, the absence of any authorized access point. The lake reflected his silhouette perfectly, doubled certainty wavering on the surface. They moved methodically, measuring distances already measured, photographing angles already approved. I answered questions succinctly, never editorializing. The camera caught it all: the pause when a claim met a document, the recalculation when a checkbox didn't fit reality. Bureaucracy reveals itself in hesitation. At one point, a call came through to one inspector's phone. His posture shifted, shoulders tightening, voice dropping. He walked away, eyes flicking back toward me and the lake. When he returned, the group conferred quietly, clipboards touching like shields. The review continued, but the rhythm had changed. By afternoon, they concluded with provisional notes and promised a written report. No violations cited on the spot, no orders issued. Neutrality again. They left as they arrived, engines fading, dust settling slowly like thoughts after an argument. I filmed the empty road until silence returned. That evening, the HOA released a statement claiming cooperation with regulators and reaffirming their position on access. It was carefully worded, vague enough to retreat later, confident enough to reassure supporters now. Comments filled quickly, speculation stacking on speculation. I didn't engage. I archived. Days later, the report arrived. Thick. Technical. Mostly favorable. No environmental violations. Structures permitted. Boundaries acknowledged. One note, however, suggested further review regarding historical access claims, a sentence that did more work than the rest combined. Ambiguity is leverage. The association seized it immediately, announcing an appeal and scheduling another meeting. Consultants returned, slides polished further, rhetoric refined. The vote was no longer the centerpiece. Interpretation was. I watched another stream, recording again as language bent around the single ambiguous line, stretching it to bridge the gap between desire and law. Meanwhile, the cameras caught subtler things. A board member walking the road alone at dusk, pausing by the gate. A different vehicle idling where it shouldn't. A new sign installed briefly, removed quickly. Small tests. Pressure probes. Each time, I documented, reported, and waited. Neighbors grew quieter. Conversations shortened. The lake's calm began to feel like the stillness before weather. I met with the attorney again, reviewing strategy. He spoke about injunctions, about declaratory judgments, about remedies that clarify when committees confuse. He also spoke about timing. Evidence ripens. Then the letter came from a different office entirely, heavy with seals and intent. It announced a hearing, mandatory attendance, subject, disputed access rights and community interest. The date loomed close. The language carried more authority than the HOA's threats, less drama, more consequence. Power had changed hands. Preparation filled the days that followed. Exhibits labeled, clips indexed, timelines assembled. I reduced hours of footage to sequences that told the story without commentary. The lake appeared in each segment, constant, a witness that didn't forget. I slept lightly, waking to check feeds, to note the quiet that meant everything was waiting. The night before the hearing, rain returned, softer this time, a whisper against leaves. The cameras watched as a single figure approached the gate, hood up, face obscured. Hands worked quickly near the latch, testing, then retreating when the hum of the fence answered. The figure left without a word. The timestamp glowed. I added the clip to the folder and sealed it. In the morning, I dressed simply, printed one more set of documents, and drove past the lake without stopping. The water reflected a pale sky, indifferent to rooms and rulings. The hearing room smelled like polish and paper, rows of chairs filled with people who believed presence mattered. I took my seat, camera memory secure, exhibits ready. The panel entered, expressions neutral, eyes sharp. They called the matter by name, my name included now, no longer implied. As the opening statements began, A courier slipped into the room and handed a thick envelope to the chair. The seal bore the county crest. The chair opened it, scanned the first page, and looked up, gaze shifting toward the association's table. The room leaned forward together, breath held, as the weight of something final settled into silence. The room changed the moment the chair finished reading. A subtle shift felt more than heard, like pressure equalizing after a door opens. Papers rustled. Chairs creaked. Faces tightened into expressions that tried to hide calculation. Authority had arrived not with raised voices, but with ink and seals, the kind that settle arguments by existing. The chair cleared the throat and summarized the contents of the envelope with careful precision. A county determination. Recorded clarification. An explicit statement of ownership and access rights, issued after review of filings that predated the association itself. The lake was named, the parcel cited, the boundaries described in language that left no room to maneuver. The hearing's purpose narrowed instantly, arguments collapsing inward as certainty took the center. Across the aisle, posture shifted. Confident spines bent slightly, hands that had rested easily on folders now gripped edges. The consultant leaned closer to counsel, whispering rapidly, eyes darting. I stayed still, letting the camera in my pocket remain unseen, letting the documents do the talking they were designed to do. The chair invited responses. The association's counsel stood, voice steady but thinner, attempting to frame the determination as incomplete, provisional, open to appeal. The chair listened, nodded once, and then pointed to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. The paragraph closed the door gently but firmly, referencing statutory authority and recorded priority. The yellow line glowed like a boundary marker under sun. Questions followed, fewer and sharper. Dates were asked for, filings requested, claims tested. Each answer narrowed the path left available. The lake appeared in my exhibits again and again, aerials and angles, timestamps showing patterns, clips showing warnings ignored. The panel's attention stayed where evidence lived. Drama didn't compete. When my turn came, I stood briefly, spoke minimally, and submitted the compiled record. No speeches. No appeals to emotion. I identified exhibits, referenced page numbers, and sat down. The camera memory rested like ballast, steadying everything. The chair called a recess. People stood, voices rising cautiously, like testing ice. Phones came out. Messages flew. I stepped outside into the hall, where windows let in a strip of pale light. The building hummed with ventilation and anticipation. Authority works this way, slow, procedural, undeniable once complete. Minutes stretched. When we were called back in, the panel returned together, decisions aligned. The chair delivered it plainly. Access claims denied. The association directed to cease all representations of shared ownership communications to be retracted. Costs assessed. A warning issued regarding future enforcement actions without basis. The lake's name appeared once more, final and clear. The room exhaled. Some shoulders dropped. Some eyes hardened. She didn't look at me. She looked at the table, at a point just beyond it, as if staring through the moment to where control used to be. The camera would have caught that, too, if it needed to. Afterward, outside the building, microphones appeared, questions asked. I declined comment, letting the determination speak. Silence can be precise. Cars pulled away one by one, conversations breaking into fragments that would travel quickly through the community. Back home, the lake greeted me with familiarity, surface smooth, reflecting afternoon light like a held breath finally released. The fence hummed. The cameras blinked. I walked the boundary slowly, touching stakes that had been argued over, measured, ignored, and finally respected. The water lapped gently, indifferent to victories, content with clarity. The association's retraction arrived that evening, posted publicly, language careful and apologetic without naming names. Flyers disappeared overnight. Signs were removed. Emails stopped. The dirt road stayed empty. Quiet returned in layers, thicker each day. Weeks passed. Grass grew back where chairs had scarred it. Tire ruts softened. Birds reclaimed the edges. Neighbors waved again, some sheepishly, some gratefully. A few apologized. I accepted without commentary. The lake doesn't hold grudges. I archived the footage, labeled meticulously, and stored backups in places designed for permanence. Documentation doesn't celebrate. It waits. Power moves on when watched. One morning, I turned off the exterior speakers that had played a soft chime when the gate opened. The cameras stayed. Trust is rebuilt slowly, with receipts close at hand. As seasons shifted, the story settled into memory, passed along with less heat and more accuracy. It became a lesson rather than a legend. Boundaries matter. Records endure. Cameras tell the truth even when voices try not to. At dusk, the lake reflected the sky's last light, quiet and whole. I stood there without filming for a moment, hands in pockets, listening to the insects begin their chorus. Ownership isn't about exclusion. It's about responsibility. And responsibility, when honored, has a way of restoring peace without asking permission.